The frontier town of Cedar Hollow existed as little more than a scratch against the vast wilderness of the American West. It was 1817, and the settlement clung to life along a trade route that connected trappers, merchants, and migrants moving westward. At the heart of this rough community stood Morrison's, a tavern and eatery that served as the town's unofficial gathering place. Anna Bridger had worked at Morrison's for 3 years, ever since her parents' wagon had broken down just outside town, and fever had taken them both within a week. She was 17 now, though she looked older. Her body was heavy, her shoulders broad from years of hauling water buckets and lifting cast iron pots that other girls couldn't manage. Her hands were scarred from hot cookware, her back perpetually aching from work that never seemed to end. She arrived each morning before dawn, when frost still clung to the windows like lace, and she left long after the last drunk had been escorted out. In between, she existed in a state of perpetual motion, chopping vegetables, stirring stews, carrying trays laden with tankards, scrubbing floors, hauling firewood. The work was endless, and so was the cruelty. Thomas Morrison, the tavern's owner, was a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He had taken Anna in not out of charity, but calculation. "Why hire 2 men when one fat girl can do the work?" he'd been heard to say. He paid her almost nothing, just room and board, which consisted of a thin blanket in the storage shed and whatever scraps remained after service. The tavern employed 3 other serving girls, Sarah, Marie, and young Beth. They were slender, quick with smiles and flirtations that earned them extra coins from lonely traders. Between rushes, they sat at the corner table, giggling and resting their feet. Anna watched them sometimes, feeling a hollow ache that had nothing to do with hunger. "Don't even think about it," Morrison had snarled the one time Anna had dared to lean against the wall for a moment. "These chairs are for paying customers, not for a fat ox to break. You want to rest? Work somewhere else." The other girls had giggled, the customers had smirked. Anna had straightened up and returned to work, swallowing the humiliation like medicine. But it was Jonas Keller, a regular trapper who spent his winters drinking away his earnings, who truly perfected the art of cruelty. "Hey, Morrison," he'd call out whenever Anna passed, "better tell the girl to stand. I can hear the floorboards groaning under her." The room would erupt in laughter, and Morrison would nod along, never defending her, always participating in her degradation. This was Anna's life, invisible when convenience demanded it, hypervisible when cruelty required a target. December had arrived with a vengeance, bringing with it winds that howled like wounded animals and snow that fell in sheets so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead. The storm that hit on December 14th was the worst anyone could remember. The temperature plummeted and the wind cut through clothing like knives. Inside Morrison's, the tavern was packed tighter than usual. Travelers who'd been caught on the road had crowded in, grateful for shelter and hot food. The fireplace roared, filling the room with blessed heat. Morrison's eyes gleamed with greed. A full house meant full pockets. Anna moved like a ghost through the chaos, her arms aching from the weight of endless trays. Sweat mixed with kitchen smoke stung her eyes. Her feet, wrapped in boots worn so thin they were little more than leather suggestions, throbbed with each step. She'd been working for 14 hours straight, and the night showed no signs of slowing. Around 8 o'clock, as Anna navigated between tables carrying a tray of ale tankards, disaster struck. Jonas Keller, already deep in his cups, threw his arm out in an expansive gesture while telling a story. His elbow connected hard with Anna's tray, sending it flying. Ale cascaded across the floor, tankards clattering and rolling. Glass shattered, the room fell silent. "You clumsy cow!" Jonas roared, leaping to his feet. "Look what you did, ruined my coat." Anna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew what came next. She always knew. Morrison stormed over, his face purple with rage. "You absolute fool! Do you know how much that ale cost?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You've embarrassed me in front of my customers for the last time." "But sir, Anna began. "Silence!" Morrison grabbed her roughly by the arm. "You want to stay warm? You think you've earned the right to be inside with decent people? Well, I'll tell you what you've earned. He dragged her toward the front door. Anna's heart began to race, cold dread flooding her chest. "Please, Mr. Morrison, I'll work harder. You'll stand outside and think about your clumsiness. Maybe the cold will sharpen your mind." He shoved her toward the door. You'll greet customers. You'll open the door for them. You'll smile. And maybe if you do it well enough, I'll consider letting you back in before dawn. Sir, please, Anna whispered, but she was already being pushed through the door. The cold hit her like a physical blow. The thin cotton dress and worn shawl she wore offered no protection against the wind that immediately cut through to her bones. Snow swirled around her, already beginning to accumulate on her shoulders. The door to the tavern remained slightly ajar, just enough to let customers in and out, just enough to show Anna the warmth she was denied. She was positioned to the left of the entrance, instructed not to block the doorway. From inside came laughter, the clink of glasses, the crackle of the fire. Out here, there was only wind, snow, and a cold so profound it made her teeth chatter within minutes. The first customer to arrive after her exile was a merchant she recognized. He glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. You work in the door now, girl. Anna forced her frozen lips into a smile. Welcome to Morrison's, sir. Please go inside where it's warm. He frowned slightly but said nothing, stepping past her into the golden warmth beyond. The door swung shut, and Anna was alone again. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Anna's entire body shook violently now. Her fingers had gone from painful to numb to completely without sensation. Her toes felt like blocks of ice in her useless boots. The snow had piled up on her shoulders and in her hair, and she knew she must look like a grotesque statue, a warning to others, perhaps, of what happened when you displeased Thomas Morrison. Several customers came and went. Some ignored her. Others made jokes. "Standing guard, are you?" One laughed. "Guess you're earning your keep." Another chuckled. "Better than a stone lion, Morrison. This one even moves." Each comment was a small blade, but Anna had learned long ago how to smile through pain. "Enjoy your evening, sir," she would say, her voice growing weaker each time. Inside, through the gap in the door, she could see Sarah laughing at a table, a warm cup of cider in her hands. She could see the fire burning bright. She could smell roasted meat and fresh bread, and she understood, perhaps for the first time with perfect clarity, that she was not considered human by these people. She was a thing, a tool, something to be used and discarded. The cold was in her bones now, in her blood, in her very soul. Her shaking had become less violent, a bad sign, she dimly realized. She tried to pray, but even thoughts were becoming difficult to form. That's when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching through the snow. Caleb Stone emerged from the storm like a figure from legend. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, wearing a heavy bearskin coat and fur-lined boots. His beard was thick and dark, his eyes sharp and gray. He'd spent the last 2 months in the mountains, trapping beaver and surviving conditions that would kill lesser men. Cedar Hollow was his supply stop, and Morrison's was where he usually took his first hot meal back in civilization. But something was wrong. As he approached the tavern entrance, his eyes fell on what he first thought was a snow-covered barrel or post. Then it moved, and he realized it was a person, a young woman, shaking so violently she could barely stand, covered in snow, with ice forming in her hair. Caleb stopped dead in his tracks. The girl looked up at him, and despite the obvious agony she was in, her face arranged itself into a smile. "Welcome to May Morrison's, see, sir," she stammered through blue lips. "But please go inside where it's warm." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He'd seen men freeze to death in the mountains. He knew the signs, the violent shaking giving way to stillness, the slurred speech, the confusion. This girl was dangerously close to that edge. "Why are you out here?" His voice was rough from disuse, but not unkind. I have to greet key customers, sir. Mr. Morrison's orders." Her smile never wavered, though tears had frozen on her cheeks. "How long have you been standing here?" I'm not sure. Maybe 2 hours? I'm fine, really." "Please, go inside, and you're not fine." Caleb looked at the slightly open door, then back at the girl. Something dark and furious was building in his chest. "What's your name?" "Anna, sir. Anna Bridger." "Anna, is there a reason you're not inside?" Her smile finally cracked. I dropped some tankards. Mr. Morrison said I needed to think about my clumsiness out here. But I'm fine, truly. Please don't make trouble for yourself on my account." Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then, without another word, he pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. The warmth and noise hit him like a wave. The tavern was packed, every table full, every customer laughing and eating and drinking. A fire roared in the massive stone fireplace. Serving girls wove between tables, and Thomas Morrison stood behind the bar, counting coins with greedy fingers. Caleb walked directly to the bar, his boots leaving wet tracks on the wooden floor. Morrison looked up and his face split into an ingratiating smile. "Caleb Stone, haven't seen you since September. Good hunting season?" Morrison's eyes glinted at the sight of Caleb's bulging pack, beaver pelts no doubt worth a small fortune. Caleb didn't return the smile. "I have a question, Morrison." Of course. What can I get you? Whiskey? The venison stew tonight is exceptional. Who are the chairs in this establishment for?" Morrison blinked, confused by the question. "Why, for customers, naturally. For paying customers." "I see." Caleb nodded slowly. "And who serves those paying customers their food and drink?" "Well, my girls do, of course. I employ the finest—" "One of your girls is currently standing outside in a blizzard." Caleb's voice had dropped to something quiet and deadly. "She's been there for 2 hours. She can barely speak through chattering teeth. She has ice forming in her hair. But she's still trying to smile and welcome customers, because apparently that's what you've ordered her to do." The tavern had gone quiet. Conversations died as people turned to listen. Morrison's smile became strained. "Ah, you mean Anna. Yes, well, she made a costly mistake this evening. Broke several tankards, wasted good ale. She's being taught a lesson about responsibility." "A lesson?" Caleb repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. And what lesson would that be? How to freeze to death, how to get frostbite, how to accept cruelty as normal. "Now see here, Stone." "No, you see here." Caleb took a step closer to the bar. "I've spent months in the mountains in conditions worse than tonight. I know what cold like this does to a person. That girl out there isn't learning a lesson. She's dying, slowly." "That's ridiculous. She's perfectly—" "Have you been out there? Have you felt that wind?" Caleb's voice rose slightly. "Let me ask the room something." He turned to address the customers, many of whom were avoiding his gaze. "That girl, Anna, who brings you your food, clears your plates, fetches your drinks, is she not a person? Does she not deserve a chair when she's not actively serving you?" Silence. Caleb continued, his voice cutting through the room. "I'll ask again differently. If that was your daughter, your sister, your wife, standing outside and killing cold because someone spilled some ale, would you find that acceptable?" A young man at a corner table shifted uncomfortably. I suppose when you put it that way." "She's not my daughter," Morrison interjected. "She's my employee. This is my establishment, and I'll run it as I see fit." "Will you?" Caleb reached into his pack and pulled out several prime beaver pelts, laying them on the bar. They were beautiful, thick, luxurious, worth at least $50. "I was going to trade these here, as I always do. I was going to eat and drink and spend good money. But I find I've lost my appetite." Morrison's eyes widened, fixed on the pelts. "Now, Stone, let's not be hasty. I'll make you an offer instead." Caleb leaned on the bar. "That girl comes inside. She sits down by the fire. She gets a hot meal and something warm to drink. She stays inside where it's warm for the rest of the night. If you agree to this, I'll trade my pelts here and eat here and recommend this place to every trapper I know. If you refuse—" He gathered the pelts back into his arms. "I'll take my business to the new trading post in Willow Creek, and I'll make sure every man I know does the same." Morrison's face had gone from red to white. The new trading post in Willow Creek was his biggest competition. If Stone and his network of trappers stopped coming to Cedar Hollow— She still has duties," Morrison said weakly. "Not tonight." Caleb's voice was iron. "Tonight she rests. Tomorrow you can discuss her duties, but they will never again include standing outside in a storm." The young man who had spoken earlier stood up. "He's right, Morrison. I've watched Anna work for 2 years. She's always first to arrive, last to leave. She works harder than anyone. And he looked ashamed. "We've all let you treat her poorly because it was easier than speaking up. But I won't watch her freeze to death outside while I eat warm food she probably cooked." His wife nodded, adding her voice. If my husband stood outside like that, I would be outraged. Why should it be different for Anna? Another customer, an older trapper named Dutch Henry, cleared his throat. Stone's got a point, Thomas. Business is business, but there's decency too. Girls worked her fingers to the bone for you. Morrison looked around the room and saw the tide turning against him. These were his customers, his income. And Stone's threat about Willow Creek was very real. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Fine, she can come inside. But this doesn't mean. It means exactly what it needs to mean. Caleb cut him off. He turned and walked back to the door, pushing it open. Anna was still standing there, though her shaking had decreased, another bad sign. Her eyes were starting to glaze over. Anna, Caleb said gently, come inside. I can't. Mr. Morrison said. Mr. Morrison changed his mind. Come on. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her hand was ice cold even through his thick coat. He helped her inside, and the sudden warmth must have been agony on her frozen skin, but she didn't complain. Caleb led her directly to the best seat in the house, a chair right beside the fireplace that Jonas Keller had been occupying. Move, Caleb said simply. Jonas looked like he wanted to argue, took one look at Caleb's face, and moved. Sit, Caleb told Anna. She sat looking bewildered and terrified, as if waiting for the trap to spring. Caleb pulled off his own heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he turned to Morrison. Hot soup, hot tea, bread, now. Anna sat in the chair by the fire, Caleb's massive bearskin coat dwarfing her frame, and tried to process what was happening. The warmth from the fire was painful on her frozen skin, pins and needles shooting through her fingers and toes as circulation slowly returned. She kept expecting someone to laugh, to tell her this was a joke, to drag her back outside. But no one did. Morrison himself brought the soup, a thick venison stew that Anna had made that very afternoon. His face was tight with suppressed anger, but he set it down without comment. A serving girl brought tea and bread, avoiding Anna's eyes. Caleb sat down across from her, watching carefully. Eat slowly, he advised. Your stomach's been empty too long. Anna's hands shook so badly she could barely hold the spoon. The first sip of soup was almost painfully hot, but it was the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, and she couldn't stop them. I'm sorry, she whispered, trying to wipe her face. I'm sorry, I don't know why You're crying because someone finally treated you like a human being, Caleb said quietly. Don't apologize for that. Around them, the tavern slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, though they were more subdued than before. Several customers looked ashamed. Others seemed angry on Anna's behalf. Jonas Keller had moved to the farthest corner of the room and was drinking alone. Dutch Henry approached the table, hat in hand. Miss Anna, he said gruffly, I want to apologize. I've eaten here for 3 years, watched you work yourself ragged, never said nothing when Morrison treated you poor. That weren't right of me. Anna looked up, startled. Oh, Mr. Henry, you don't need to— Yes, I do. Man's got a duty to speak up when he sees wrong being done. I've failed that duty. He placed 2 silver coins on the table. This is for you. For all the times you gave me extra portions when you thought no one was looking. Other customers began approaching. Some apologized, some left coins, some simply nodded respectfully as they passed. Anna sat in stunned silence, overwhelmed by this sudden reversal of fortune. Morrison watched from behind the bar, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. But he said nothing. Caleb's pelt sat on the bar like a promise and a threat. As Anna slowly ate her soup, warmth gradually returning to her body, Caleb studied her. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 19 or 20. Despite her size, there was a delicacy to her features, a kindness in her eyes that no amount of cruelty had managed to extinguish. She moved carefully, as if constantly aware of the space her body occupied, trying to make herself smaller. How long have you worked here? He asked. 3 years, Anna replied softly. Since my parents died. You have other family? No, sir. My parents were heading west. This was supposed to be just a stop along the way. And Morrison took you in, Anna nodded. He gave me work, a place to sleep. I know I should be grateful. Grateful? Caleb's voice held an edge. For what? For working 16-hour days? For sleeping in a storage shed? For being treated like you're less than human?" Anna flinched. I know I'm not like the other girls. I'm not pretty. I'm not—" "Stop." Caleb leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully. The way Morrison has treated you has nothing to do with how you look. It has everything to do with the kind of man he is. He saw someone vulnerable and alone, and he took advantage. That's not your failing. It's his." Anna stared at him, this strange man who had appeared from the storm like an avenging angel. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "I know enough." Caleb sat back. "I know that no one deserves to be left to freeze as punishment for an accident. I know that strength isn't just in muscles. It's in getting up every day and continuing, even when the world tells you you're worthless. And I know cruelty when I see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Anna eating her soup while Caleb sipped his whiskey. Around them, the tavern continued its business, but something fundamental had shifted. The other serving girls were bringing Anna sympathetic looks now instead of mockery. Customers were careful not to be demanding or rude. As the evening wore on, Morrison approached the table. "Anna," he said, his voice stiff, "you should go to bed. Early morning tomorrow." Anna started to rise, but Caleb held up a hand. "She'll go when she's ready, unless you'd like to reconsider our arrangement." Morrison's face purpled, but he retreated. When Anna finally stood to leave, still wrapped in Caleb's coat, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know how to repay." "You don't need to repay anything, but Anna—" He waited until she met his eyes. "Tomorrow, and every day after, remember this, you have the right to be treated with dignity. If Morrison ever tries something like tonight again, you find me. I'll be in town for a few days before heading back to the mountains." Anna nodded, though she couldn't quite imagine a world where she could stand up to Morrison. She made her way to the storage shed that served as her room, still feeling the warmth of the fire, the taste of hot soup, the weight of kindness she thought she'd never experience again. Behind her, Caleb sat for a long time, staring into the fire, wondering what kind of world had let this happen. Dawn came cold and gray. Anna woke in her usual corner of the storage shed, buried under her thin blanket with Caleb's bearskin coat laid carefully on top. For a moment, she thought the previous night had been a dream, a wonderful, impossible dream. Then she smelled the coat's scent of pine and smoke, and knew it had been real. She rose before first light as always, but for once her heart didn't feel quite so heavy. She returned the coat to the peg by the front door where Caleb had indicated he was staying upstairs in one of Morrison's rented rooms, then set about her morning duties, building up the fire, starting the breakfast preparations, sweeping the floor. Morrison appeared just as she was mixing biscuit dough. He watched her in silence for a long moment, and Anna braced herself for the explosion she knew must be coming. "That won't happen again," he finally said. Anna's hand stilled. "Sir?" "Last night. That man interfering with how I run my business? It won't happen again. Once he leaves town, things will go back to normal." Anna's brief spark of hope died. Of course this wouldn't last. She nodded silently and returned to her work. But Morrison had miscalculated. Word of what had happened spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire. By midday, the town was buzzing with the story of how the mountain man had stood up to Morrison, how the girl who'd been treated like a draft animal had finally been shown kindness. That afternoon, 3 women from the settlement came to the tavern. Anna was scrubbing the front steps when they arrived. Mrs. Blackwood, the minister's wife, Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store with her husband, and young Mrs. Potter, newly married to the blacksmith. "Anna Bridger?" Mrs. Blackwood asked gently. Anna stood, wiping her hands nervously. "Yes, ma'am?" "We heard about what happened last night. Is it true you were made to stand outside in the storm for 2 hours? Anna's face flushed. It was a punishment, ma'am. I dropped some tankards." The 3 women exchanged glances. Mrs. Chen spoke next, her accent thick but her words clear. "My husband and we come from very far. In our country, sometimes people treated bad for being different. We know this pain. What Morrison do to you is not right." "We've come to offer you other work if you want it," Mrs. Blackwood said. "Mrs. Chen needs help at the store. I need help with the church linens in the school. The Potters need someone to help with their home. Any of us would be happy to employ you properly, with a real wage and a proper room." Anna stared at them, unable to process what she was hearing. I don't understand. Why would you help me?" Mrs. Potter, young and earnest, reached out and took Anna's hand. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because we're ashamed it took a stranger to make us see what was happening right under our noses." Before Anna could respond, Morrison burst out of the tavern. "What's going on here? Anna, get back to work." Mrs. Blackwood drew herself up to her full height, which wasn't much, but her presence was formidable. "Mr. Morrison, we are offering Miss Bridger alternative employment. I trust you won't prevent her from considering opportunities that might better suit her welfare?" "She's under contract with me. She owes me for 3 years of room and board." "Room and board?" Mrs. Chen's eyebrows shot up. "You mean sleeping in storage shed and eating scraps? That is not room and board." "How I run my business affects all of us," Mrs. Blackwood interrupted. "Cedar Hollow is a community, Mr. Morrison. What you do reflects on all of us. After last night, I'm ashamed that our town's hospitality is represented by such cruelty." Morrison sputtered, but before he could respond, Caleb Stone emerged from the tavern. He must have been listening from inside. "Morning, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "I see you've met Anna." "We have," Mrs. Blackwood replied, "and we were just discussing her future prospects." Caleb nodded approvingly, then turned to Anna. "What do you want to do?" The question hit Anna like a physical blow. What did she want? She couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her that. She looked at the tavern, at Morrison's red face, at the women waiting patiently for her answer. "I don't know." "That's all right," Caleb said gently. "You don't have to decide today. But Anna, know this. You have choices. You always had choices. Morrison just convinced you otherwise." Anna didn't leave Morrison's that day, or even that week. Change, she was discovering, was terrifying, even when it was good. But things had shifted irreversibly. The chair by the fire became Anna's chair. When she had a moment between duties, she was allowed, even encouraged, to sit there. Customers who had once mocked her now nodded respectfully. Those who didn't quickly found themselves facing cold stares from their neighbors. Morrison, sensing the tide had turned against him, began treating Anna with grudging civility. He stopped making comments about her weight. He stopped forcing her to work impossible hours without rest. He even, though this seemed to cause him physical pain, began paying her a small wage. Caleb stayed in town longer than he'd planned. He told himself it was because the hunting had been good and he needed to properly trade his pelts, repair his equipment, and stock up on supplies. But the truth was, he found himself drawn back to Morrison's each evening, ostensibly for dinner, actually to make sure Anna was all right. They fell into a pattern of conversation. Anna would bring his food, and if the tavern wasn't too busy, he'd gesture for her to sit. At first, she was too nervous, convinced Morrison would appear and rage at her, but gradually, she relaxed. "Where are you from originally?" she asked one evening. "Pennsylvania originally. My father was a farmer. I was supposed to take over the farm, marry the neighbor's daughter, live a predictable life." Caleb smiled slightly. "Instead, I discovered I couldn't breathe in predictable. So I came west." "Do you ever miss it? Your family?" "Sometimes. But I found something better in the mountains. Freedom. The freedom to be who I am without expectations weighing me down." He looked at her carefully. "What about you? Who were you before all this?" Anna thought about it. "I don't remember anymore. My parents died when I was 17. Before that, I was just their daughter. I helped my mother cook, helped my father with the wagon. We were going to California. My father said there was opportunity there, that we could start fresh." "You still could." "Could what?" "Go to California, start fresh." Anna laughed, but it was a sad sound. "With what money? What prospects? I'm a fat girl with no family and no skills except cooking and cleaning." "First," Caleb said firmly, "stop describing yourself the way Morrison trained you to. You're a young woman with strength, endurance, and enough resilience to survive 3 years of abuse while maintaining your kindness. That's not nothing." Anna blinked, feeling tears threaten again. She seemed to cry so easily now, as if 3 years of suppressed emotion were finally finding their way out. Second, Caleb continued, you have skills. You can cook better than anyone I've met. You can manage a household, handle accounts, organize work. Those are valuable skills. You sound like you're trying to convince me to leave Cedar Hollow. I'm trying to convince you that you can. Whether you should is your choice. Over the following weeks, Anna did begin making choices. She accepted Mrs. Chen's offer to work part-time at the general store, learning to manage inventory and handle sales. She started attending Mrs. Blackwood's Sunday services, where she discovered a community of people who saw her as a person, not a burden. She even began taking meals with other people instead of alone in the kitchen, experiencing the novel sensation of conversation over dinner. And slowly, gradually, she began to see herself differently. Not as the fat girl who deserved punishment, but as Anna Bridger, a survivor, a hard worker, someone with value. Spring arrived with impossible speed, transforming the frozen landscape into something green and alive. Caleb had stayed in Cedar Hollow far longer than usual, nearly 4 months instead of his usual 2-week stop. He told himself it was good business sense. He'd found a new supply line for his pelts and was negotiating better rates. But everyone in town, including Caleb himself, knew the real reason. Anna was at the general store when Mrs. Chen first said it aloud. That mountain man, he care for you, she said matter-of-factly while they were organizing new fabric deliveries. Anna nearly dropped the bolt of cloth she was holding. What? No, that's not, we're just friends. He's been kind to me. But, Anna, Mrs. Chen said gently, I have seen many things in my life. I know what it looks like when a man sees a woman and thinks, there is someone worth knowing. Caleb Stone looks at you like that. You're mistaken, Anna said firmly. Men don't look at me that way. They look at pretty girls like Sarah, not at girls like me. Mrs. Chen made a disapproving sound. You still think this way? After everything? Anna, you are kind, you are strong, you are smart. These things matter more than being thin. Caleb Stone knows this. Why you don't? Anna had no answer. She'd spent so long believing she was unworthy of affection that the possibility of someone caring for her seemed impossible. But Mrs. Chen's words planted a seed. Anna began noticing small things, how Caleb always sat where he could see her working, as if making sure no one was mistreating her, how his face lit up when she joined him for conversation, how he'd learned what her favorite tea was and always ordered it when she sat down, how he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. One evening in late April, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Caleb asked Anna to walk with him. They strolled to the edge of town, where the wilderness began its reclamation of the world. I need to leave soon, Caleb said suddenly. Summer's the best time for mountain travel, and I have traps to check, new territory to scout. Anna's heart sank, though she tried to keep her face neutral. Of course, you've stayed much longer than usual already. I have, because... He stopped walking and turned to face her. Anna, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Can you do that? Anna nodded, her heart suddenly pounding. When I first saw you standing in that storm, I was angry. Angry at Morrison, angry at a world that could let something like that happen. But as I got to know you these past months, anger turned into something else. Admiration, respect, and then, he took a breath, affection. The kind of affection that makes a man who loves the mountains consider staying in town. The kind that makes the wilderness feel lonely for the first time in 10 years. Anna stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. I know this is sudden. I know you might not feel the same way. But I couldn't leave without telling you. You deserve to know that someone sees you, really sees you, and finds you remarkable. Caleb, Anna whispered. I'm not the kind of woman men fall in love with. You're intelligent and resilient and kind, despite having every reason to be bitter. You work harder than anyone I know. You have the most beautiful smile I've ever seen, especially now that it's real instead of forced. And yes, you're beautiful to me, exactly as you are. Tears were streaming down Anna's face now. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or run off to the mountains immediately. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that you deserve love, that I could be the one to offer it, if you'd let me." Anna was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the world in gold. Finally, she said, "When my parents were alive, my mother used to tell me that God made different people for different purposes. She said I was strong like this for a reason, that someday I'd understand why. I think maybe this is why. So I could survive, Morrison, so I could still be here when you walked in from that storm." Caleb reached out slowly, giving her time to move away, and took her hand. "So, you'll think about it?" Anna squeezed his hand back, marveling at how perfectly it fit around hers. "I don't need to think about it. The answer is yes. To whatever you're asking. Friendship, courtship, a future, yes." The town of Cedar Hollow had a wedding that summer that people would talk about for years, not because it was elaborate, it wasn't. The ceremony took place outside the tiny church, with Mrs. Blackwood's husband officiating and what seemed like the entire settlement in attendance. Anna wore a simple but beautiful dress that Mrs. Chen and several other women had sewn together, each contributing fabric and labor as their wedding gift. What made it memorable was the joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy radiating from the bride and groom. Anna, who had once been invisible except as a target for cruelty, stood beside Caleb and glowed with happiness. And Caleb, the solitary mountain man whom most people had assumed would never settle down, looked at his new wife as if she'd hung the moon. Morrison attended the wedding, though no one had invited him. He stood at the back, his face unreadable. Some said he looked ashamed. Others said he looked calculating, already trying to figure out how to profit from the connection to Caleb Stone. Anna chose not to care either way. She'd given Morrison 3 years of her life. She wouldn't give him another moment of her attention. The newlyweds didn't leave Cedar Hollow, which surprised some people. Caleb's still trapped in the mountains, but he built a cabin on the edge of town, sturdy and well-made, with a large fireplace and windows that let in morning light. Anna kept her job at the general store and started a small business baking bread and pies for sale. Between Caleb's trapping income and Anna's baking, they did well. But more than financial success, they found happiness. Caleb would leave for the mountains for weeks at a time, but he always came home to Anna, to warmth and laughter and belonging. Anna discovered what it meant to be cherished, to have someone who thought her presence made the world better, not worse. 2 years after their wedding, Anna gave birth to a daughter. They named her Hope because that's what she represented, proof that life could transform, that cruelty didn't have to be permanent, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Hope grew up hearing the story of her parents' meeting, the night of the terrible storm, the girl standing in the snow, the mountain man who walked in and asked a simple question that changed everything. "Where is your chair?" he demanded, and in doing so, demanded that Anna be treated as human. 10 years after that fateful winter night, Anna stood in her own establishment, a bakery and cafe that had become the heart of Cedar Hollow. It was nothing like Morrison's. Her place was warm and welcoming, with comfortable chairs, good food, and most importantly, respect for every person who worked there. She employed 4 people now, and each of them had their own chair, their own break times, their own dignity. Some of them were young people starting out. One was an elderly widow who needed income. Another was a young man with a twisted leg who'd been told he'd never be able to hold down a job. Anna treated them all the way she wished she'd been treated. Morrison's tavern still existed, but it had declined. Caleb had made good on his subtle threat. He'd directed his network of trappers and traders to other establishments. Slowly but surely, Morrison's customer base had eroded. The tavern still survived, but barely. One cold winter evening, exactly 11 years after the night Caleb had walked in from the storm, the door to Anna's cafe opened. An old man shuffled in, his shoulders bent, his clothes shabby. It took Anna a moment to recognize Thomas Morrison. He stood uncertainly just inside the door, looking around at the warm, bustling space. Former employees of his worked here now, laughing and chatting with customers. The contrast to his own empty, cold tavern must have been stark. Anna watched him, waiting. She could have him thrown out. She would have been justified. But something in his posture, a brokenness perhaps, or finally arrived regret, made her pause. "Mr. Morrison," she said quietly, "are you here for food?" He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Do you have money? Some. His voice was barely a whisper. Anna gestured to an empty table, not the best seat in the house, but not the worst either. Sit, I'll bring you soup and bread. Morrison's head jerked up, confusion and suspicion warring on his face. Why? Anna thought about all the ways she could answer that question. She could tell him it was Christian charity. She could tell him it was to prove she was better than he'd ever been. She could tell him it was pity. Instead, she told him the truth. Because everyone deserves a chair and a warm meal. Even you. I learned that from a man who walked in from a storm and taught me I was worth more than I'd been told. I'm choosing to pass that lesson forward. She brought him soup, not scraps, but a proper bowl, hot and fragrant. She brought fresh bread and butter. She treated him the way she treated every customer, with basic human dignity. Morrison ate in silence, tears running down his weathered cheeks. When he finished, he stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. I'm sorry, he said simply, for everything. I was wrong. Anna nodded. Thank you for saying that. He left, and Anna never saw him again. She heard later that he'd sold the tavern and left Cedar Hollow. She didn't know where he went, and she found she didn't particularly care. His chapter of her story was closed.